Hello and welcome to Handpan Voices. My name is Phil and I'd like to start by saying thank you to all of you who have clicked on the videos and listened to the podcasts online. I really appreciate your support and all your comments. It means a great deal. This episode is a special one. It's called Handpan Stories and it's more about the story about the instruments that we love to play. This one in particular is from Amy Naylor, who's recorded a lovely story for me about her Desert Rose by Elaia Handpans. So without further ado, let's get into the episode.
Hi, I'm Amy, and this is my handpan story. My handpan story is about the Elaia Desert Rose handpan. It's one of my favorites, and it has, I think it's the one that has the most wonderful story to it. So in 2019, I decided that I was going to quit my job and travel the world, as you do. I had one instrument at the time, I think, maybe two. I think one though, just the D Kurd from ACL. And I put some clothes inside it. I packed a little backpack and I started traveling just with a handpan and a backpack. I started in Italy. I stayed with a friend of mine named Juliet, who I met at the Women's Handpan Gathering back in 2018, I think. And I went on from there to stay with another few friends in Italy. And one of the friends that I stayed with, or two of the friends that I stayed with, were this amazing couple called Sabine and Flavia. I'd met them maybe half a year earlier when I'd given a workshop at Juliet's house. They'd come both to attend and to offer and provide some instruments because they have a great collection of handpans. I didn't know them at the time, but once I stayed with them, I quickly learned that they're actually incredible members of the community, amazing supporters, really had been part of building handpan community in the early days. They'd hosted handpan players, concerts, workshops, that kind of thing. And they were generally just really great people. So I'd kind of landed in the perfect place right at the beginning of my travels. Bearing in mind that at this time, I wasn't really much of a player yet. I didn't know anybody really. I was still my identity was still quite tied around taiko. I was very much a taiko player, and any traveling that I had done was predominantly for that with my group Karatani. And I hadn't really had any, kind of big gigs in handpan world. No one really knew who I was yet, so I was still finding my way. And I'd stumbled into Sabine and Flavia's house somehow, which was kind of perfect and amazing. Anyway, so when I arrived there, only Sabine was home, and she told me that she was going to host a little dinner party, and so she started cooking, and she was like, I don't need any help, you go hang out, rest, play some handpan, whatever you need to do. So of course I just started going through each of the handpans in their collection and just playing stuff, and during that time I stumbled across an Elaia, and I recognised it from across the room. Because back then, those handpans, they were nitrided steel, and they had this wonderful finishing on them that were almost like quite galaxy-like. It was almost like dropped paint. I don't know exactly what it was or how they did it, but they were very obvious as instruments. And I knew I really wanted to play it because I'd seen Mumi's videos online, Mumi who builds the instruments. And she was the first female handpan player that I'd seen on YouTube and that I'd been really, really inspired by. And I'd watched her videos over and over and over again. Like, I was a huge fangirl, big, big, big fan. So I was thrilled to stumble across this Elaia and get to play it. And I start playing and I completely fall in love with the scale. I can't find a way to stop. Like, you know how sometimes you really get sucked into a certain scale, and there was literally no resolve on it. There was no and now we find the end. It was just, I just couldn't find a way to stop playing what I was playing. I was just in it over and over and over and over and over. And then I stumble into this lovely pattern, and I'm playing that over and over again. A mini bit of composition starts to arise. And so I go in the kitchen and I ask Sabine what scale it is, because I had no idea. And she said, oh, that one's actually one of Flavia's instruments. I don't know what that is. But the maker is coming for dinner tonight, so you can ask her. So I'm like, oh my God, Mumi's coming to dinner. Oh my God, I'm her biggest fan. This is amazing. I had no idea. I thought it was just going to be some of Sabine's mates. But of course, they're mates. Handpan people, right? So then I'm at this dinner with all of these handpan people, one of which is Mumi. One was also Benny Botane, who I was also a fan of, and we became friends as well. And so I asked Mumi about it, and she said, yeah, it's called the Desert Rose, and it's based on the C sharp harmonic minor scale, but it's really interesting because it's got a G sharp in the middle, blah, 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 blah. I had no idea what any of these things meant. Because I didn't have any music theory knowledge back then. This was, 5 years ago? No music theory knowledge, very little handpan knowledge, really. I was just really enjoying playing mine. I didn't know anything about, the physics of building an instrument then either. And she was just, going deep, She was saying all these words. I was nodding and smiling. I had no idea what she was talking about, but I could see the passion. I could see that she was, really skilled in what she was doing and really knew what she wanted to create as well. And it was just so inspiring. And I knew there and then that I wanted to ask her to build me an instrument, but I didn't because I couldn't afford it. But I'd quit my job. I had a handpan in a backpack. I was traveling the world. I didn't know how long I was going to be doing that for. I didn't know when I was going to get a gig. I wasn't performing then. I wasn't teaching. I wasn't doing any of that. I was just sleeping on couches and eating into my savings. It was winter. I wasn't going to afford a handpan. But I was so inspired. And then the next day after this dinner, I spent all morning just composing with this instrument. And I filmed myself playing this little composition that I wrote, and you can find it on YouTube. I don't remember what it's called. I'll find it. And then I kind of interspersed video clips of my trip to Milan, And and then I came home and I didn't have that instrument anymore, but I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I couldn't stop listening to that piece. And it doesn't happen very often that I listen back to my own playing, because I don't know, I think a lot of people struggle with this, listening to your own stuff. It's kind of weird. It feels kind of vulnerable. It's a little bit strange. It's really not my favorite music, I want to listen to other people and be inspired, but I would listen to that track and be inspired, which is so rare that happens. And I think it was because I was just really in it and really stepping out of the way and letting that instrument come through. It was the instrument that I was inspired by, and the patterns and the music that was coming through that instrument rather than me, if you like. Anyway. So a year or so passes by, and I reach out and I ask her to build me an instrument. And I said that I wanted that Desert Rose that I'd played so that I could continue my composition. Then another year or so passes by, and I finally hear back. We had a little interaction back then, but I finally hear back about progress, and she says, yeah, I've had a few goes. I've made 3. And, I tried it with this note, and I've tried it with that note, and then this version, I didn't like that. I want it to be good because it's for a friend. And I was like, oh my God, Mimi's my friend. Oh my God, Mimi thinks we're friends. This is amazing. And it felt like such an honor and a privilege to know that someone was pouring so much heart and soul into this instrument for me. That's huge. And that never really happened before. Well, it had, but not in this exact same way. I mean, my first good instrument, my D-Curd from Asiel, Michael Colley, in France, that was also, he reached out to me, in fact, and asked if he could build me that instrument, because I was playing a really shoddy, bad instrument before that. And so he offered to make me a nice one, which is another story and incredible. But this was the first time someone had really designed something for me, I said I wanted this, and she said, yeah, but I can do it better, And so she really was working towards making an even better version of it. And so I just kind of trusted her and left her to it. And then, and then eventually she's like, what's your address? I'm sending you this instrument. And so arrived my Desert Rose stainless steel version, which I wasn't sure about at first because I knew that I loved the nitride. So I was a little bit gutted in the beginning, but then I played it and completely changed my mind. It was stunning. It had this lovely sheen on it. The way it reflected the light was gorgeous. It was extended. It had lovely mutant notes. And suddenly I could finish my composition. And it was only within like a couple of weeks of having it that I finished composing that piece from like a year or so ago, 2 years ago. And I filmed a piece and I recorded it and I put it online and I performed it. You know, I was starting to get gigs there and I performed it in all sorts of places. I let friends borrow it and play it. Loads of people really fell in love with that instrument. It was the crowd pleaser, you know? It was just, everybody was just like, what is this? It's stunning. I want it. I need it. And it was such a joy to bring it to those people. Fast forward another year or so, and I had a gig in Florida, Pan Marco. It's like a trade show in Florida. And there was a bunch of us friends who had this gig. By this point, I've got friends in Handpan land, you know. So I hear from Mumi that she was also going to be performing at Pan Marco, which was super exciting. So I asked her on the off chance, you know, what handpans are you bringing? Because I only ever travel with one instrument and I work out my set around that and then I borrow other handpans because I'm just too tiny to carry multiple instruments. I don't want to put my body through that. Mumi, however, also tiny but badass, is bringing 3 instruments, one of which is a desert rose. And I'm like, brilliant, I can perform that piece at Pan Marco, thank you so much. So she brings it. We're all hanging out at Peter Levitov's house in Florida, another amazing dude. And I fall in love with this desert rose. She's like really worked hard on really improving some certain elements to it. The mutant notes were particularly crisp and brilliant. She'd added a C sharp underneath that just like filled the scale. And you know how earlier I talked about how the scale just didn't resolve, so I couldn't stop playing. This C sharp brought that resolve, so it just really completed the scale, which is amazing. And I loved it. And yeah, obviously I told her this. And she said, okay, well, next year, in a few months, when we've both got time, bring your old desert rose to Milan and we'll swap. Which was incredible. So I do. So I take my desert rose and she swaps it out for this new and improved version with an extra note and cleaner notes on top. And I'm yet to record a version of that piece. The piece is called Mandala Mind, by the way. It's the one piece I've written on this pan. I improvise on it a lot, but I've only ever composed one thing on it. It's very rare that I actually compose just pieces nowadays anyway. But yeah, I have this one piece on this instrument, and now I play it slightly differently because this pan again is slightly different, but I haven't recorded this iteration of it, and I really want to, because now it's been through 3 kind of versions. And yeah, so that's the story I wanted to share, because I just think it's so fascinating to see how one scale and one instrument can really evolve, and how this one piece, Mandala Mind, that is that one piece of mine that I actually listen to, that I actually really love, how that has evolved with it, and how it was just a series of amazing opportunities and events that has led me to be in the right place at the right time, to come into contact with that instrument, with that maker, to see the passion, and to, you know, to connect with her and be able to just really fully trust her process, in what her vision is and what she wants to build, and trust that whatever that is will be the right thing for me, because I've just stumbled into this, you know, so perfectly and so magically. Yeah, it's just been a beautiful journey with it. And that handpan right now as I speak is actually at a friend's house, because again, everybody just loves it. And it brings me so much joy to be able to kind of just leave it with people and let them enjoy it, you know. So that's the story of the Desert Rose. And maybe one day I will record the final iteration, the final, what do you call that? Evolution, I guess. You know, when Pokemon evolve, it's kind of like that. Of Mandala Mind on the Desert Rose. Thank you for letting me share this story. It's such a wonderful idea. Thank you, Phil, for this wonderful podcast. And I look forward to hearing some other people's stories as well. yeah, big love. Cool. See you soon.